In a busy office building in the heart of Los Angeles, there was an employee named Mark who always stood out from the crowd. He wasn't just another worker trying to climb the corporate ladder. He was known for his sharp tongue and bold opinions. Mark considered himself a man of logic and reason, someone who rejected anything that couldn't be proven with cold, hard facts. His co-workers often described him as confident, but some whispered that he could be overly critical, especially when it came to topics like religion or spirituality. Every day at lunch, Mark would gather a small group of colleagues around him, eager to share his thoughts on life, science, and what he called the nonsense of superstition. Whether it was astrology, prayer, or meditation, nothing escaped his biting sarcasm. To him, these things were relics of a bygone era, things people clung to because they were too afraid to face reality. Some of his co-workers enjoyed the debates, while others simply nodded along, not wanting to argue with someone so sure of himself. One sunny afternoon, as Mark sat at his desk scrolling through his phone during a slow workday, he stumbled upon an article about Keanu Reeves. The headline caught his attention: How Keanu Reeves' Mother Shaped His Life Through Spirituality. Intrigued, he clicked on the link and began reading. The article talked about Patricia Taylor, Keanu's mother, and how she had embraced New Age philosophies after years of hardship. It mentioned crystals, energy healing, and even astrology, all things Mark found utterly ridiculous. As he read, a smirk spread across his face. "This has got to be a joke," he muttered under his breath. Without thinking twice, he turned to his coworker Lisa, who happened to be sitting nearby. "Hey Lisa, did you know Keanu Reeves' mom is into all this mystical stuff? Like, seriously, energy healing. What does that even mean?" He laughed loudly, making sure everyone within earshot could hear him. Lisa looked up from her computer screen, unsure how to respond. "I don't know much about it," she said cautiously, "but maybe it helps her feel better somehow." "Feel better?" Mark repeated, rolling his eyes dramatically. "Come on, Lisa. You can't honestly believe that waving your hands over a rock or chanting weird words actually changes anything. It's all fake, a way to make gullible people part with their money." His voice carried across the open-plan office, drawing curious glances from other employees. A few chuckled nervously, knowing Mark's reputation for tearing apart anything remotely spiritual. Others exchanged uncomfortable looks, sensing where this conversation might lead. Mark leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the attention. "Think about it," he continued, raising his voice slightly. "Here's Keanu Reeves, one of Hollywood's biggest stars, and yet his mom is still clinging to this nonsense. Doesn't that strike anyone else as bizarre? I mean, if I were him, I'd tell her to stop wasting time on fairy tales and focus on real solutions." The room grew quieter as more people stopped what they were doing to listen. Some agreed with Mark, nodding along silently, while others felt uneasy. They admired Keanu Reeves, not just for his acting talent, but also for his humility and kindness. Hearing someone mock his family felt wrong, even if they weren't brave enough to say so out loud. Lisa tried again to steer the conversation in a different direction. "Maybe it's not about solving problems," she suggested softly. "Maybe it's about finding peace or comfort. People deal with stress in different ways." Mark snorted dismissively. "Peace and comfort? Please. If you want peace, go for a run or meditate properly without the mumbo-jumbo. This isn't about helping anyone, it's about selling fantasies to desperate people." His words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. No one dared challenge him further. After all, arguing with Mark was like trying to convince a brick wall to change its mind. It rarely ended well. Instead, the group returned to their tasks, leaving Mark to bask in his self-proclaimed victory. But as the hours passed, something unexpected happened. Another article popped up on Mark's phone, this one featuring an interview with Keanu himself. In it, the actor spoke candid findings. Later that same day, Mark couldn't resist sharing his newfound discovery about Keanu Reeves' mother during a team meeting. The group had gathered in the conference room to discuss an upcoming project, but Mark quickly steered the conversation off track. "You won't believe what I found out today," he began, leaning forward with a smug grin. "The Keanu Reeves, is letting his mom waste her time on all sorts of ridiculous spiritual nonsense. Energy healing? Crystals? Seriously? His boss, Sarah, raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. She knew better than to engage when Mark got like this. Still, the tension in the room was palpable. Some employees shifted uncomfortably in their chairs while others exchanged wary glances. Lisa, who had already tried reasoning with him earlier, decided to stay quiet this time. She didn't want to give Mark more fuel for his argument. Undeterred by the lack of enthusiasm, Mark pressed on. "Think about it," he said, gesturing dramatically as if delivering a grand speech. "Here's a guy who's supposed to be one of Hollywood's smartest and most down-to-earth actors, and yet he lets his mom chase after these fantasies. Doesn't that seem strange to anyone else? If my mom was into something so absurd, I'd set her straight real quick." A few people chuckled nervously, though most remained silent. One of the newer employees, a young woman named Rachel, finally spoke up. "Maybe it's not about setting her straight," she offered hesitantly. "Maybe it's about respecting her choices, even if you don't agree with them." Mark turned to her with a condescending smile. "Respect is one thing," he replied, "but blindly supporting someone's bad decisions is another. Let's call it what it is. Superstition wrapped in fancy words. It doesn't make it any less silly." Rachel opened her mouth to respond but thought better of it and looked down at her notes instead. Mark took her silence as agreement and leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "Honestly," he continued, addressing the group, "I think successful people should lead by example. They should show the world that logic and reason are what truly matter. Not this mumbo-jumbo." The meeting dragged on, though no one seemed particularly focused on the original agenda anymore. Mark's rant had cast a shadow over the room, leaving everyone feeling uneasy. As soon as the session ended, people filed out quickly, eager to escape the tension. Only Lisa lingered behind, watching Mark pack up his things with a frown. "You really enjoy stirring the pot, don't you?" she asked, crossing her arms. Mark shrugged, unfazed. "I'm just telling the truth. Someone has to." Lisa sighed, shaking her head. "Sometimes the truth isn't as simple as you think it is." With that, she walked away, leaving Mark alone in the conference room. Unbeknownst to Mark, his words had sparked curiosity among some of his coworkers. Later that afternoon, Lisa decided to do a bit of digging herself. She pulled out her phone and searched for information about Keanu Reeves and his mother. What she discovered surprised her and made her question whether Mark's harsh judgment was entirely fair. According to several interviews and articles, Patricia Taylor, Keanu's mother, had faced immense challenges throughout her life. She had struggled with poverty, abusive relationships, and health issues, yet she never lost her sense of hope. Her embrace of spirituality wasn't about rejecting reality. It was about finding strength and resilience in the face of adversity. Far from being gullible or naive, Patricia came across as a deeply thoughtful and courageous woman. Even more striking was how much Keanu credited his mother for shaping the person he had become. In interviews, he often spoke about her unwavering optimism and kindness, qualities that had inspired him to remain humble despite his fame. He described her as his anchor, someone who taught him the importance of empathy and gratitude. These weren't just empty platitudes, they were values he lived by every day. Lisa felt a pang of frustration toward Mark. How could he dismiss something so meaningful without even trying to understand it? She considered confronting him again, but she knew it wouldn't do any good. Mark wasn't the kind of person to change his mind easily, not unless something forced him to see things differently. As fate would have it, that opportunity arrived sooner than anyone expected. The very next day, the office received an unexpected announcement. Keanu Reeves himself would be visiting their building within the hour. Apparently, his production company was exploring potential partnerships with their firm, and he wanted to meet the team personally. News of his impending arrival sent waves of excitement through the office. Employees scrambled to tidy their desks, adjust their outfits, and prepare for the chance to meet one of Hollywood's most beloved stars. Mark, however, remained unimpressed. "Big deal," he muttered under his breath as he heard the buzz around him. "He's just another actor trying to sell movies. Why is everyone acting like this is such a huge event? Despite his indifference, Mark joined the rest of the staff in the lobby, where they waited anxiously for Keanu to arrive. When he finally walked in, dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket, the atmosphere shifted instantly. There was a warmth about him that put everyone at ease. He greeted each employee with a genuine smile, shaking hands and thanking them for their hard work. His humility was striking. He didn't act like a celebrity basking in admiration, but rather like someone genuinely interested in connecting with others. When Keanu reached Mark, there was a brief pause. Something about Mark's demeanor seemed off, though Keanu couldn't quite place it. Still, ever the professional, he extended his hand and introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Keanu," he said warmly. Mark hesitated for a moment before shaking his hand. "Yeah, I know who you are," he replied awkwardly. "I mean, who doesn't?" Keanu chuckled lightly, seemingly unfazed by Mark's curt response. "Well, thanks for having me here today," he said before moving on to greet the next person. Though the interaction lasted only seconds, it left a lasting impression on both men, though neither realized it at the time. For Mark, it planted a tiny seed of doubt. Was Keanu really as clueless or pretentious as he'd assumed? And for Keanu, there was something intriguing about Mark's guarded attitude, a hint of skepticism that hinted at deeper layers beneath the surface. Little did either of them know their paths were destined to cross again in ways neither could predict. After the initial meet and greet in the lobby, Keanu Reeves was ushered into the main conference room for a formal discussion with the team. The atmosphere was electric, with employees buzzing about the rare opportunity to interact with such a famous yet humble celebrity. Everyone took their seats, eager to hear what Keanu had to say. Mark, however, sat at the far end of the table, arms crossed, an expression unreadable. He wasn't excited like the others. If anything, he seemed annoyed by the whole spectacle. The meeting began with introductions and a brief overview of the potential partnership between Keanu's production company and the firm. Once the formalities were out of the way, Keanu leaned forward slightly, his demeanor relaxed but attentive. "I just want to thank all of you for welcoming me here today," he said with a warm smile. "It's always inspiring to see people working together toward a common goal." His words immediately put the group at ease. For the next hour, Keanu shared insights into his career, discussing everything from his early struggles as an actor to the lessons he'd learned along the way. He spoke candidly about failure, perseverance, and the importance of staying true to oneself. His tone was conversational, almost as if he were talking to old friends rather than strangers. At one point, the conversation turned to personal values and how they influenced his work. That's when Keanu mentioned his mother, Patricia Taylor. "A lot of who I am today comes from her," he explained, his voice softening. "She went through some really tough times, things that would break most people, but she never lost faith. Her belief in love, hope, and kindness kept her going, even when life felt dark." Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He hadn't expected this part of the discussion. Up until now, he'd managed to tune out most of what Keanu was saying, dismissing it as typical motivational fluff. But hearing him talk so openly about his mother made Mark uneasy. It wasn't just the content of Keanu's words. It was the sincerity behind them. There was no trace of pretense or self-promotion, only genuine gratitude. "She taught me that belief isn't always about religion," Keanu continued. "Sometimes it's about trusting in things you can't see, like love, hope, and the goodness of others. Those are the things that keep us moving forward, especially during hard times." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed his words. Lisa glanced over at Mark, wondering how he would react. To her surprise, he didn't roll his eyes or make a sarcastic comment. Instead, he stared down at the table, his jaw clenched tightly. For the first time, Mark looked unsure of himself. When the meeting concluded, Keanu stayed behind to chat with a few employees individually. Most people lined up to speak with him, thanking him for his time and sharing their admiration for his work. Mark hung back, lingering near the door while pretending to check his phone. He told himself he wasn't interested in speaking with Keanu, but deep down he couldn't deny feeling curious. Something about the actor's calm confidence intrigued him, even though he hated to admit it. Eventually, Keanu noticed Mark standing, apart from the crowd. With a polite nod to the person he'd been speaking with, he walked over. "Hey, mind if I join you?" he asked, gesturing toward the empty chair next to Mark. Caught off guard, Mark hesitated before mumbling, "Sure, I guess." He avoided making eye contact, suddenly feeling awkward and out of place. Keanu sat down, studying Mark with quiet curiosity. "You seem skeptical," he observed after a moment, tilting his head slightly. "Am I wrong?" Mark forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Skeptical? Nah, not really. I don't know. I'm more into facts than feelings, you know? Stuff you can prove." Keanu nodded thoughtfully, not appearing offended in the slightest. "Fair enough," he replied. "Facts are important, but sometimes facts don't tell the whole story. My mom's strength came from believing in things I couldn't see, but that didn't make them any less real to her." Mark opened his mouth to respond, but found himself at a loss for words. He wanted to argue, to explain why he thought belief in invisible forces was irrational. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the calmness in Keanu's voice. Or maybe it was the realization that mocking someone's beliefs wouldn't change their mind. Whatever it was, Mark simply shrugged and muttered, "Yeah, well, I guess everyone's entitled to their opinion." Keanu smiled faintly, sensing that the conversation had reached its limit. "Thanks for being honest," he said as he stood up. "That takes guts." With that, he extended his hand once more. This time, Mark shook it without hesitation. As their hands met, he felt a strange mix of emotions: embarrassment, respect, and maybe even a hint of admiration. It was a fleeting moment, but it left a lasting impression. Later that evening, as Mark drove home from work, his mind kept replaying the events of the day. He couldn't shake the image of Keanu sitting across from him, speaking so earnestly about his mother and her beliefs. Try as he might, Mark couldn't dismiss it as nonsense anymore, not entirely. There was something undeniably powerful about the way Keanu carried himself, the way he spoke with conviction without ever sounding superior or condescending. For the first time, Mark allowed himself to consider the possibility that he might have been too quick to judge. He remembered Lisa's earlier comment about respecting people's choices, even if you don't agree with them. At the time, he'd brushed it off as naive, but now he wondered if there was truth to it. Could it be possible to disagree with someone's beliefs while still acknowledging their value? As he pulled into his driveway, Mark decided to do something he rarely did: research. He grabbed his laptop and typed Patricia Taylor Keanu Reeves into the search bar. What he found surprised him. Articles, interviews, and videos painted a picture of a woman who had endured unimaginable hardships yet refused to give up. Her embrace of spirituality wasn't about escaping reality. It was about finding meaning in chaos and choosing to rise above it. Mark scrolled through photos of Patricia, noticing the same warmth and resilience in her eyes that he'd seen in Keanu's. Slowly, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Maybe Keanu's humility and kindness weren't just random traits. They were reflections of the lessons his mother had instilled in him. And maybe, just maybe, Mark had underestimated the power of belief. By the time he closed his laptop, Mark felt a pang of guilt. His earlier mockery of Patricia's spiritual practices now seemed shallow and unfair. He realized that tearing down someone else's beliefs didn't make him smarter or wiser. It only revealed his own ignorance. For the rest of the night, Mark sat quietly, reflecting on what he had learned. He knew he couldn't take back his harsh words, but perhaps he could start changing the way he approached life, and the people in it. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew. Over the next few days, Mark found himself thinking about Keanu Reeves and his mother more often than he cared to admit. It wasn't just guilt weighing on him. It was curiosity. For someone who prided himself on logic and reason, Mark couldn't ignore the fact that Patricia Taylor's story had stirred something inside him. Her resilience in the face of adversity, her ability to find hope when life felt hopeless. These weren't things he could easily dismiss as superstition or nonsense. At work, Mark tried to act normal, but his mind kept wandering back to what Keanu had said during their brief conversation. Sometimes facts don't tell the whole story. Those words lingered in his thoughts like an unanswered question. What did they mean? Was it possible to believe in something without needing proof? And if so, why did it matter so much to people like Patricia and even Keanu? One afternoon, while everyone else was busy with meetings or deadlines, Mark decided to dig deeper. He opened his laptop and searched for interviews where Keanu talked about his mother. One video caught his attention, a clip from a talk show where Keanu spoke openly about how Patricia had shaped his worldview. As Mark watched, he noticed something he hadn't before: gratitude. Keanu didn't just tolerate his mother's beliefs, he respected them. He credited her strength and optimism for helping him navigate his own challenges, including the tragic loss of loved ones and the pressures of fame. Mark paused the video, staring at the screen. He realized that mocking Patricia's spiritual practices hadn't made him smarter or superior. It had only blinded him to the bigger picture. Belief, he began to understand, wasn't always about proving something was true. Sometimes it was about finding comfort, purpose, or connection in a world that often felt chaotic and cold. That evening, Mark went home feeling restless. He couldn't shake the sense that he'd been missing something important, not just about Keanu's family, but about life itself. Sitting alone in his apartment, he picked up a book he'd received years ago as a gift. It had been gathering dust on his shelf, untouched and unappreciated. The title read, Man's Search for Meaning, by Viktor Frankl. On a whim, he flipped it open and started reading. The book told the story of Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the horrors of Nazi concentration camps. Despite unimaginable suffering, Frankl discovered that meaning could be found even in the darkest moments. He argued that humans have an incredible capacity to endure hardship if they can find a reason to keep going, whether it's love, faith, creativity, or service to others. As Mark read, he felt a strange sense of recognition. This idea resonated with what he'd learned about Patricia Taylor. She hadn't let her pain define her. Instead, she'd used her beliefs to rise above it. By the time Mark finished the first chapter, his perspective had shifted slightly. He still didn't fully understand spirituality or its appeal, but he no longer saw it as meaningless. Maybe belief wasn't about ignoring reality. It was about finding a way to live with it. Maybe Patricia's practices weren't absurd after all. Maybe they were tools she used to cope, to heal, and to grow. The next morning, Mark arrived at the office unusually early. He wasn't sure why. He just felt the need to clear his head before another busy day. As he sipped his coffee, he noticed Lisa already at her desk, typing away on her computer. Normally, he wouldn't have bothered her, but today was different. Summoning his courage, he walked over and cleared his throat. "Hey, Lisa," he said, awkwardly. "Can I ask you something?" Lisa looked up, surprised. "Sure, what's up?" Mark hesitated, unsure how to phrase his question. "You know that stuff we talked about the other day about Keanu's mom and all that spiritual stuff? Do you think there's any truth to it?" Lisa blinked, taken aback by his sudden interest. "Truth?" she repeated. "Well, I guess it depends on what you're looking for. If you're asking whether crystals actually heal people, then probably not. But if you're asking whether believing in something can help someone feel better or stronger, then yeah, I think there's truth to that." Mark nodded slowly, processing her words. "So it's less about the thing itself and more about what it means to the person, right?" "Exactly," Lisa replied with a small smile. "It's like religion, or meditation, or even exercise for some people. It's not always about the action, it's about the mindset behind it. Why does it matter to you anyway?" Mark shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "I don't know. I've just been thinking about it a lot lately." Lisa studied him for a moment, sensing that something had changed. Well, whatever it is, I'm glad you're open to exploring it, she said kindly. That's the first step to understanding. As the week went on, Mark continued to reflect on everything he'd learned. He started noticing small acts of kindness around the office, things he'd previously overlooked. One day, he saw Lisa patiently helping a new employee set up their workstation. Another time, he witnessed Sarah, their boss, staying late to mentor a junior staff member. Even outside of work, he began paying closer attention to strangers holding doors open for each other or offering friendly smiles. These moments felt oddly profound to Mark. They reminded him of Keanu's words about belief in love, hope, and goodness. Slowly, he began to see that these values weren't confined to spiritual practices. They were part of everyday life. People didn't need crystals or rituals to embody them. They just needed compassion and intention. One evening, after weeks of reflection, Mark decided to take action. He sat down at his desk and pulled out a pen and paper. For the first time in years, he wrote a letter. Not an email, but an actual, handwritten note. Addressing it to Keanu Reeves, he poured his thoughts onto the page. He apologized for his earlier attitude, admitting that he'd been too quick to judge. He thanked Keanu for sharing his insights and expressed admiration for his humility and grace. When he finished writing, Mark folded the letter carefully and sealed it in an envelope. He didn't expect a response. In fact, he doubted Keanu would even read it. But sending it felt like the right thing to do. It was his way of acknowledging growth, however small, and taking responsibility for his past behavior. A few weeks later, to Mark's astonishment, he received a reply. The envelope bore Keanu's signature scrawled across the front, and inside was a short handwritten note. Dear Mark, it began, thank you for your honesty. Growth isn't always easy, but it's worth it. Keep exploring new perspectives. You never know what you might discover. Holding the note in his hands, Mark felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He knew he still had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. His journey wasn't about converting to spirituality or abandoning his skepticism. It was about learning to approach life with greater humility and openness. And though he never saw Keanu again, the lessons he gained from their brief interaction stayed with him forever, shaping the way he viewed the world and the people in it. Mark didn't tell anyone about the letter he received from Keanu Reeves, not even Lisa. He kept it tucked away in a drawer at home, pulling it out occasionally to reread the few lines that had left such a deep impression on him. Each time he read it, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Growth isn't always easy, but it's worth it. To Mark, this wasn't just encouragement, it was permission to keep questioning, learning, and evolving. Over the following weeks, subtle changes began to show in his behavior. At work, he became quieter during lunchtime debates, choosing to listen rather than dominate the conversation. When colleagues shared stories about their families or personal struggles, he paid closer attention instead of brushing them off as irrelevant. Even his tone softened. Sarcasm gave way to curiosity, and dismissiveness turned into genuine interest. Some noticed the shift, while others barely registered it, but everyone agreed that Mark seemed different. One day, during another team meeting, Sarah brought up the topic of workplace culture. We're all here because we want to succeed, she said, pacing slowly in front of the room. But success isn't just about numbers or deadlines. It's also about how we treat each other. What kind of environment are we creating for ourselves? Her question sparked a lively discussion. People chimed in with ideas about improving communication, celebrating milestones, and supporting one another through challenges. Mark stayed, quiet for most of it, letting others speak first. But when the conversation shifted to the importance of empathy, he surprised everyone by raising his hand. I think empathy is more than just understanding someone's situation, he said cautiously, glancing around the room. It's about respecting their perspective even if it's not the same as yours. I used to think I had all the answers, but lately I've realized that listening is just as important, if not more, than talking. The room fell silent for a moment. Then Lisa smiled warmly. "That's really insightful, Mark," she said. "I'm glad you said that." Mark nodded, feeling a mix of pride and vulnerability. For years, he'd prided himself on being the smartest person in the room. Now he was beginning to see that wisdom came in many forms, and often it wasn't about having all the answers. It was about asking the right questions. Outside of work, Mark continued exploring new ideas. He started reading books recommended by Lisa, ranging from philosophy to psychology to memoirs of people who had overcome adversity. One book in particular stood out, The Untethered Soul, by Michael A. Singer. It challenged him to think differently about emotions and beliefs, suggesting that inner peace came not from controlling external circumstances, but from changing how we respond to them. Though some concepts still felt abstract, Mark found himself applying small lessons to his daily life. When stuck in traffic, instead of getting frustrated, he reminded himself to breathe deeply and let go of anger. When disagreements arose at work, he practiced pausing before reacting, giving himself time to consider the other person's point of view. These changes might have seemed minor, but they added up over time, making him feel calmer and more grounded. One evening, while walking through a park near his apartment, Mark saw a group of people gathered under a tree. Curious, he wandered closer and discovered they were practicing meditation together. Normally, he would have scoffed at the idea of sitting quietly for 20 minutes, but something compelled him to stay. As he watched, one of the leaders invited newcomers to join. Without fully understanding why, Mark stepped forward and took a seat. The experience was strange at first. Sitting still felt unnatural, and quieting his mind proved harder than he expected. But as the session went on, he began to notice a sense of calm settling over him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. By the end, he realized he wanted to try again. Over the next few weeks, he attended several more sessions, gradually becoming more comfortable with the practice. Back at the office, Mark's transformation didn't go unnoticed. His coworkers began treating him differently, sensing that his sharp edges had softened. Conversations flowed more easily, and tensions that once flared quickly now dissipated faster. Even Rachel, the young employee who had timidly challenged him during that infamous lunch debate, approached him with a smile one afternoon. "Hey, Mark," she said hesitantly, "I just wanted to say, I think you've been doing great lately. You seem more open-minded." Mark blinked, caught off guard by her compliment. "Thanks, Rachel," he replied after a pause. "That means a lot." Her words stayed with him. Long after their brief exchange, they reminded him of how far he'd come and how much further he could go if he kept trying. As months passed, Mark decided to take his newfound openness a step further. He reached out to Patricia Taylor herself, hoping to learn directly from the woman whose story had sparked so much reflection. Through a mutual connection, he managed to arrange a phone call. Though nervous at first, Mark soon found himself captivated by Patricia's warmth and wisdom. She spoke openly about her journey, sharing both the highs and lows with remarkable honesty. "What helped me the most," she explained, "wasn't believing in any one thing. It was believing in myself. Life threw a lot at me, but I learned to trust that I could handle it. Belief doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes it's just about saying, 'I'll get through this.'" Her words resonated deeply with Mark. He realized that belief didn't have to mean adopting rituals or doctrines. It could simply mean trusting in your ability to endure, adapt, and grow. For someone like Mark, who had always relied on logic and control, this was a revelation. By the time the year drew to a close, Mark was no longer the same person who had mocked Keanu Reeves' mother months earlier. He hadn't abandoned his skepticism entirely. He still valued reason and evidence, but he had learned to appreciate perspectives beyond his own. Most importantly, he had discovered that growth wasn't about rejecting who you were. It was about embracing the possibility of becoming someone better. On New Year's Eve, as fireworks lit up the sky outside his window, Mark sat alone in his apartment reflecting on the past year. He thought about the conversations, the books, the moments of self-doubt and clarity that had shaped him. Pulling out Keanu's letter once more, he smiled softly. Growth wasn't easy, but it was worth it, and he was finally ready to embrace it fully. As the new year unfolded, Mark found himself stepping into a role he never imagined he'd take on. Mentor. It wasn't an official title or anything formal, just something that happened naturally as his coworkers noticed the changes in him. People started coming to him for advice, not because he had all the answers, but because they sensed he was willing to listen without judgment. At first, Mark felt unsure about this shift. He wasn't used to being seen as someone others could turn to, but over time, he realized how much he enjoyed helping others navigate their own challenges. One day, a junior employee named Tom approached him after a team meeting. "Hey, Mark," Tom began hesitantly. "Do you mind if I ask you something? It's kind of personal." Mark nodded, gesturing for Tom to sit down. "Sure, what's on your mind?" Tom sighed, looking down at his hands. "I've been feeling stuck lately. Like no matter what I do, it's never enough. My parents keep pressuring me to succeed, and I feel like I'm letting them down." Mark listened carefully, remembering a time when he would have dismissed such concerns as weakness. Now, though, he understood that everyone carried burdens, even if they didn't show it. "That sounds tough," he said gently. "Have you talked to them about how you're feeling?" Tom shook his head. "Not really. I don't think they'd understand. They just want me to be successful, you know? But sometimes I wonder if I'm chasing their dreams instead of my own." Mark thought for a moment before responding. "It's okay to feel lost, Tom. Everyone goes through that at some point. What helped me was realizing that success isn't just about achievements. It's also about staying true to yourself. Maybe try asking yourself what makes you happy, not just what makes them proud." Tom looked up, surprised by the sincerity in Mark's voice. "Thanks, Mark. That actually helps." As Tom walked away, Mark felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Helping someone else made him realize how far he'd come since those days of mocking beliefs he didn't understand. Growth wasn't just about changing himself. It was about using what he'd learned to make life better, for himself and for others. Around the same time, Mark decided to revisit the topic of spirituality, not to adopt it but to understand it better. He reached out to Lisa, knowing she had always been more open-minded than him. "Hey Lisa," he said one afternoon. "Do you mind if we grab coffee sometime? There's something I want to ask you." Lisa raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Of course. What's up?" Over coffee, Mark explained his curiosity about spiritual practices. "I know I've been critical of them in the past," he admitted, stirring his cup absent-mindedly. "But I'm starting to think there's value in exploring things outside my comfort zone. Do you have any suggestions?" Lisa smiled, pleased by his openness. "Well, it depends on what you're looking for. Some people find meditation helpful, while others connect with nature or art. Have you ever tried journaling? It's a great way to reflect on your thoughts and feelings." Mark nodded thoughtfully. "I haven't, but it sounds interesting. Maybe I'll give it a shot." From that conversation, Mark began experimenting with new ways to explore his inner world. Journaling became a daily habit, allowing him to process emotions he'd previously ignored. He also revisited meditation, finding solace in its simplicity. These practices didn't turn him into a believer overnight, but they gave him tools to navigate life's uncertainties with greater patience and clarity. Meanwhile, word of Mark's transformation spread beyond the office. Friends and acquaintances, who hadn't seen him in months, were struck by how much he'd changed. Gone was the sharp-tongued skeptic who dismissed anything he couldn't explain. In his place stood someone thoughtful, curious, and genuinely interested in understanding perspectives different from his own. One evening, during a casual get-together with old friends, someone brought up religion and spirituality, the very topics that used to ignite heated debates whenever Mark was around. This time, however, he stayed silent, listening intently as others shared their views. When someone turned to him and asked, "What do you think, Mark?" he paused before answering. "I think belief is complicated," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "It's not just about facts or proof. For some people, it's about finding meaning or connection. I may not agree with everything, but I respect why it matters to them. His response surprised his friends and himself. He realized then that his journey wasn't about reaching a final destination. It was about embracing the process of learning and growing. Every conversation, every book, every moment of reflection added another layer to his understanding of the world. By mid-year, Mark felt ready to share his story publicly. Though he wasn't one for grand gestures, he knew his experience might inspire others to question their assumptions and remain open to change. With Lisa's encouragement, he wrote an article for the company newsletter titled "The Power of Perspective." In it, he recounted his initial skepticism toward Keanu Reeves' mother, the lessons he'd learned from Keanu himself, and the ongoing journey of self-discovery that followed. The article resonated deeply with readers. Employees from across departments reached out to thank Mark for sharing his vulnerability. One message in particular stood out. "Your story reminded me that it's okay to change our minds. Thank you for showing us that growth is possible no matter where we start." Reading those words filled Mark with gratitude. He hadn't set out to influence anyone, but seeing the impact of his honesty reinforced the importance of staying authentic, even when it meant admitting mistakes. Looking back on the past year, Mark marveled at how much his life had transformed. From mocking beliefs he didn't understand to embracing curiosity and empathy, he had traveled a long road. Yet he knew this wasn't the end. Growth, he realized, was a lifelong journey, one that required courage, humility, and an open heart. A crisp autumn morning, as sunlight streamed through his office window, Mark sat quietly reflecting. He pulled out Keanu's letter once more, rereading the lines that had guided him through so many moments of doubt. "Keep exploring new perspectives. You never know what you might discover." Smiling softly, Mark tucked the note back into his drawer. He didn't need proof to believe in its truth anymore.